Today, we welcome Andy Brewer, Associate Director of Sustainability and Recycling at Plastics Industry Association, or commonly known as Plastics. Andy leads the association efforts in advocating for growth of sustainability in the plastics industry by managing the Plastics Recycling Committee, promoting recycling development through the New End Market Opportunities Program, and managing the Net Zero Net Waste Recognition Program. This program is proudly brought to you by the charter participants. Oh, I apologize. Let me go back one. That's Wisconsin Department of Resources, the Green Tier Program, the Association for Roll-to-Roll Converters, SGP Program, Flexographic Technical Association, the Great Lakes Graphics Association, Printing United Alliance, and TLMI. I'll be your moderator today. I'm president of Great Lakes Graphics Association. My name is Joe Lyman. A little bit about the logistics today in terms of the webinar itself. All attendees are muted. If you have a question or comment, please use the chat box to submit your questions. Questions will always be answered at the end of the program. This webcast is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you in the near future. Information will follow in an email, including the slides of the presentation. A little bit about today's agenda. We'll welcome and introductions. Sustainability for the Green Printing Partnership in Green Tier. Plastics is a valuable material in the circular economy. How to lower both material cost and your footprint using plastics. Recycling technologies for plastics, industry pledges, and then consumer perceptions that shape the recycling industry. At this time, I'd like to ask Jenny Burkholz to explain a little bit about the benefits of both the Green Tier program within DNR and the SGP program. Jenny?
Thanks, Joe. It's easy for Wisconsin printers to demonstrate their company's commitment to becoming part of the environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, and circular economies. You can do this joining one of these two or both of these two premier sustainability programs, the Wisconsin Green Tier program and the Sustainable Green Printing Partnership, or SGP. Printers seeking local and national acknowledgement of their commitments to be a sustainable business can be certified by both Green Tier and SGP through a streamlined process. A common evaluation criteria, audits, and reports make it easy for Wisconsin printers to gain more benefits for their sustainability efforts. You get public recognition from both. They both have different processes for tracking your environmental impacts, and they provide you tools to help move your sustainability program forward and improve, do continual improvement and reduce your environmental footprint. So feel free to reach out to either organization for more details. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Jenny. Again, today, I'd like to introduce Andy Brewer, Associate Director of Sustainability and Recycling for the Plastics Industry Association. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me too. I am here, throw my camera on here for a minute, but I may go off while I talk through today's presentation. But like Joe said, Andy Brewer, I work for the Plastics Industry Association and Associate Director of Sustainability and Recycling. I've been with the association for actually just over 3 years now. And I came from industry where I worked about 6 years in injection molding. So I'm going to walk you through kind of what the plastics market looks like today in terms of recycling, some of those things driving demand of recycled content. And then knowing the background of this group is more in film, or you may work with film flexible materials. We can have kind of an open dialogue about that after the presentation, because there's a lot of activity going on in film and we are heavily engaged in it as well. So with that being said, I think let's jump on in. All right, you can keep going. So we'll learn a little bit about, I'm going to pretty much try and sell you on plastics. I know a lot of people use plastics, but some overall facts about plastics, and then kind of jump into what we do as an association, as a trade association for the industry, and then walk through all this recycled content. So starting off, why plastics? Plastics are all around us. We use them every day in our lives. I'm sure 90% of the things sitting on your desk right now probably made of a plastic material. They save lives. A lot of plastics used in the healthcare, medical fields, both for lightweighting of materials, sterilization. There's really endless benefits of using plastics. Also have a lot of energy savings. Plastics compared to other materials, we always kind of compare ourselves to the paper and aluminum industry. When you look at those industries, it takes a lot less energy to produce plastic resins as well as recycle them compared to those other two. Plastics also play a huge role in emission savings. It's the reason that most automotive vehicles right now are pretty much made of plastic. I think by volume, it's the highest material in a car right now. So extremely useful when you lightweight, save on gas, save on emissions, and also just kind of you have this product versatility, and you're able to mold a plastic material really into anything. It also uses less natural resources when compared to production of other materials. And unlike what a lot of people say, plastics are extremely recyclable. I think, at the end of the day, most plastics can be recycled. We talk a lot about things being recycled versus being recovered, which we'll talk about here in a bit. So we can flip on to the next. So at Plastics, we work to protect, promote, and grow the industry. We are an industry association that represents the full value chain of the industry. So that means that our members include, you can flip to the next one here too. Sorry, I'm normally flipping through these as I talk. So our members include equipment manufacturers, mold makers, material suppliers, processors and converters. So those are the people making the plastics, and then recyclers. So we are the only trade association that engages that full supply chain. It's a huge benefit to have that big of a network and to work on different recycling projects when you have all those different hands that are engaged in the recycling process. Go over to the next one. You can click through. Yeah, just click through until everything shows up there. Perfect. So this is our plastic strategic plan developed by our membership a number of years ago. But we are continuously advocating for the plastics industry, communicating the good news about plastics and those scenarios where plastics are being used, and then focusing a lot on internal, external education. So this is engaging with our community, with our consumers, as well as the industry, trying to keep them up to speed on what's happening in the recycling space, what's happening in the plastic space in general. And then that last category of sustainability was added a few years ago, which has really turned into kind of the entire focus of the plastics industry right now. You don't see a lot of companies producing plastics that do not have sustainability goals, that don't have recycling targets. So that is a huge, huge space we're pushing with, and that's what my group does specifically at Plastics. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see our sustainability framework here. So we kind of have developed these three pillars. We have buckets underneath each one of these that my group works on specifically. The first one being promoting and developing a circular plastics economy. This is where my committee comes in play, the recycling committee. It's a group of about 100 different members of plastics engaged in the different aspects of recycling. So we work on different projects that focus on, targeting hard to recycle materials, difficult to recycle materials, taking our members, solving the technical and logistical challenges that come with that, and then kind of being that proof of concept for the industry. So say, hey, we can recycle these materials. Here's how we did it. Here's how we processed them. Here's the new we found for them, and kind of putting that information out there to help further develop the industry. Second one on there, eliminating plastic waste from, go back, there you eliminating plastic waste from entering the environment. We have a program called Operation Clean Sweep, which focuses on pellet loss during the manufacturing process and transportation process. So that program engages members, teaches them safe practices for transporting materials, keeping as many plastic materials out of the environment as we can. And then last one, use resources responsibly. This kind of comes into play with our Zero Net Waste program, which Joe kind of mentioned in my bio. Zero Net Waste is a philosophy to divert, 90% plus of your materials from landfill during a manufacturing process. It's actually how I got engaged with the industry association as a young engineer at an injection molding company. So that's a really neat program too, and we can talk about that later on after the presentation as well. So let's move into kind of what sustainability means. I'm sure everyone's heard this term. You can go to the next one here. There you go. So meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. If you go to the next slide, sustainability is this large umbrella term. It does include many more things outside of just recycling. Recycling falls under that environment portion, but we're also very focused on society and the economy. You need all these three things to work together to be sustainable. And that is kind of what our team does at Plastics. So I'm the recycling guy. We have a diversity and inclusion section of that. And then we also have an economic portion. So if you flip to the next. So looking at these three pillars a little closer, the economy, right? This is like managing your house, making sure that products are economically friendly to support society, to continue building the economy. And this also falls into play with reasonable production, right? We don't want to be overproducing, spending a lot on material inventory, things like that. Going into the society portion, social equity and justice, creating equal opportunity access for everyone, one size fits all within this society portion here. And that's why if you've seen in people's sustainability goals, diversity and inclusion has been a big addition here in the past couple of years. And then lastly, the environment. We want to consume things responsibly. We do support and follow the waste hierarchy, reduce, reuse, recycle, and we want to conserve our materials over the long haul, which is why we're so focused on getting this, circular economy to a place where it needs to be with plastics. So let's move on here. Talk a little bit about the circular economy. Not sure if anyone's heard of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but they're basically a charitable foundation that companies sign into that focuses solely on creating a circular economy. The circular economy is a system when materials never become waste and nature is regenerated. Great way to think about this is kind of like a forest or a jungle. Things grow in a forest, they die, they fall to the ground, and they break down and fertilize the soil to create new trees, new plants, everything. That is a great, perfect little example of what a circular economy is. And that's what we kind of want to focus on within plastics, keeping those materials in a constant flow. So on the next slide is a great image here from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, kind of covering what the circular economy takes and all the different aspects and things that come into play. Like I said at the beginning, it's not just recycling, right? We do follow the waste hierarchy, so use and reuse is part of that equation. Using renewable source feedstock, which could be bioplastics, other forms of biomaterials that can go into composting, and then your overall arching one is recycling as well. We do have marine plastics listed on there because that has become a big push for companies recently to, it's a great story to be recycling plastics taken from the ocean and putting them into their products. So that's a big thing the Ellen MacArthur Foundation focuses on as well. So if we go to the next slide, talking a little bit more specifically about plastics here. These are our two technologies that are in play now with recycling, mechanical and advanced recycling. We can talk as much as you'd like about advanced recycling, as little as you'd like. This is also, you may have also heard this in the form of chemical recycling or molecular recycling. But these are our two main processes that we use. Mechanical recycling, pretty self-explanatory. These operations, recover plastics using different mechanical processes. Normally with the plastics material, something gets put in a bin, it gets sorted. That sorted material gets sent somewhere, they grind it down, they wash it, they separate out contaminants, they dry it, and then they re-extrude it back into a pellet. And that can be either used as full 100% recycled content, or it'll get compounded with a virgin material to be used as a mix. Advanced recycling, chemical recycling is a little more in depth, a little more scientific, but it's a process that encompasses any compositional transformation technology to convert a plastic into a purified form that can be used in the production of new polymers, monomers, other plastic materials. Advanced recycling, you're going to hear a lot of these terms over the next couple of years. These technologies are really starting to become at scale. It's taken a lot of work to kind of build that infrastructure, and that infrastructure is continuing to grow. So you may hear all the different forms here: purification, depolymerization, methanolysis, conversion, pyrolysis, gasification. I'd say pyrolysis is probably the most popular right now, and the most being used across all the different companies that have built these facilities. But it's a unique process. It requires energy to kind of take a plastic material back down into its original monomers. And then they're able to separate those out and create new product out of it. If you go to the next, I think I have some comparisons here. There you go. So with mechanical, over the years, LCAs have become really popular. That's a life cycle analysis. So with any type of recycling technology and any type of material, we're producing LCAs for the industry to show the benefits versus throwing in the trash or versus making a new product. So when you look at mechanical, you're going to have the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, and that's compared to virgin resin production as well as advanced recycling. We have a large existing infrastructure for mechanical recycling, which is very important, but it is limited to cleaner material sources. So post-consumer streams coming out of a material recovery facility. So this would be like what you recycle at home. You put all these materials in a bin, those get separated out. There are certain streams that come out of that mechanical recyclers have issues with, and they have to inherently add more processes up front to get a cleaner stream before they can fully recycle it. You also may over time see a material degrade, so you may have a lower yield come out of that batch, and then there are some performance and quality limitations. When you're mechanically recycling, you are adding more heat to the material, so you are melting it a little more. So that's where the degradation would come in play. But there's ways to go around this. We have different additives, different compounds that we add to recycle materials that help boost those material properties. So mechanical is still kind of our bread and butter right now when it comes to recycling. Advanced recycling is going to play a huge role, and will, and currently is already. Capacity is very large right now for advanced recycling. You do have a little bit higher greenhouse gas emissions when compared to mechanical, but it's still better than virgin resin production. Advanced recycling also can handle a larger assortment of materials. So you may see some of the mixed material streams going to advanced recyclers, chemical recyclers to be recycled. And this also for this group, like a multi-layer film. This is where they can take that material and break it back down into its original bases and separate out those different layers. So very important for those types of materials. The other beauty behind advanced recycling is once you are complete, once you have a finished product, that product is indistinguishable from virgin resin. So you're not going to see those changes in material property. It's essentially like you have a virgin resin, created from a recycled feedstock. So there's a lot going to play with advanced recycling. We can talk all day on it. Chain of custody, mass balance, if you've heard those terms before, that's going to be very important to be transparent as an industry with advanced recycling. And then lastly on that list is, you kind of can infinitely recycle using those technologies. So if we move to the next, I have a couple numbers just behind the recycling industry, you know, capacity overall, we are at a point where some of our biggest challenges are getting enough material to fill that capacity. So with mechanical recycling, for example, you know, if someone recycles a polypropylene, they are going to have capacity to recycle a certain amount of tons per year, but they can't get enough material right now to meet that capacity to fill them up. So that's our biggest gap right now, is just collecting feedstock, and that's why we work to educate, you know, consumers on how to recycle. We need to keep filling that system to be at, you know, a full capacity for recycling. But these two technologies, a ton of investments over the years. This is not anything that's slowing down. It's exponentially growing right now. So for mechanical recycling, we ran a study over the past 5 years or so, and there's been about $1.4 to $1.6 billion invested in that. And that's invested into expansion, invested into technology. And then from advanced recycling, we and another association kind of track those numbers, and that total investment sits at about 8.7 billion right now. So that is a big section of industry that there's a lot of work going on with scaling those materials. So more to come there, definitely in the near future. So if we go to the next one. So I like to look at this, these different factors driving demand for recycled content. I think it's very important, and this pretty much sums up, you know, all the different factors that are in play here. No really particular order to this. Maybe material substitution top and being a smaller section is reasonable, but these different things, material substitution, legislation and policy, we have these sustainability pledges, which we'll talk about, and then overall consumer awareness and environmental awareness. So we'll walk through each of these here and go from there. So if you go to the next one.
52, 53, 54, 5, 56, 57.
All right.
59.
So with material substitution, this is basically a conscious effort by manufacturers to substitute to a more recyclable material. Joe and I were chatting at the beginning. He mentioned he was working on polystyrene in the past. So this is a great example of something that has kind of shifted and substituted out of industry. So if you think back, you know, coffee cups, things like that used to be made of styrofoam. Those materials have kind of shifted to polypropylene now. Polystyrene is being recycled in the United States, but the manufacturers thought that it might be easier to make them out of a different material so that they could be more easily recycled. This is also a scenario where a company may choose to use the bioplastics or a, you know, compostable material. And then this also goes into play with reuse schemes, right? So you may see the great examples of plastic bag. You start having these reuse cloth bags, woven bags. So all of this comes into play with driving that overall demand right now for recycled content by creating more content that is recyclable. If we go to the next one. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about the policy landscape within plastics. I'm sure our industries have a lot in common. You may see some familiar terminology here. But the biggest thing is this first slide. So in the past year, plastics related bills were proposed in every single state across the US. There's a lot of activity right now, both federal and state legislation. We'll walk through a few of the top ones for plastics. And then feel free to ask me more questions here at the end. If you go to the next one, we're going to start with minimum recycled content. So these are bills being passed in states that require manufacturers to use a certain percentage of recycled material in their products. This will overall has a ton of good benefits, increases that, you know, recycled content and recycled material demand, also increases the market value. A big thing comes into play with buying recyclable materials versus buying virgin materials, and that's the cost of material. As a manufacturer, are you going to buy, you know, a virgin resin that's 10 cents less expensive than a recycled resin? Probably, but that's where we want to make the change, and that's where this type of legislation can kind of make that shift into making recycled content a higher commodity. It also reduces risks associated with investments. So when a mechanical recycler, makes plans to increase capacity, says we're going to be, recycling 2 million more pounds of PET per year, they start to collect that product. They need contracts to go to an OEM or a brand owner. When you have this type of legislation in place, this kind of drives the brand owners to keep that commitment. So little less weary on the mechanical recycler side when they know that that material is going to be needed versus creating this capacity and maybe one day it's not needed. The most important thing about this section of legislation is it's important to design policy overall with considerations for what the current market looks like. So you can't come in and say, hey, we need 90% recycled content in all your products by next year, because there's just not enough material in the market right now to feed that demand. So this is a very important one. If you flip to the next slide, this is kind of what the landscape looks like at the moment. So current, starting out on the West Coast, kind of where everything in legislative moves first, California, Washington, Oregon. But a lot of these have been brought to session. This will definitely change over the next 2-3 years with minimum recycled content. If we go into the next one, this one's a quick and easy one. Everyone should know about plastic bans. These are aimed to prevent plastic pollution, reduce certain plastic production as well for unnecessary materials, and then also lower our climate impacts. These plastic bans really change the overall consumer mindset, though, for plastic materials, right? So for bans right now, really popular ones, you see our straws, bags. I don't think we've gone further than that. I don't think they'll ever ban bottles. I know we have a lot of different bottle types now. I've seen the cardboard bottles, the aluminum cans to drink water out of. But these plastic bans really kind of shape how the consumer thinks. So over time, you're going to see more and more of these bans. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see that this is starting to spread across the states pretty good right now. So that's why you're seeing in some stores, if you live in any of these states, they may start charging you for plastic bags and so on. So if we flip to the next one, EPR, extended producer responsibility, pretty important one for the industry right here. And this is definitely a newer bill, bunch of new bills that are starting to be passed state by state. Benefits the overall system though, and is pretty important. So EPR is basically a policy approach in which the producers of materials end up taking responsibility for the management of their products that they produce to their end of life. So what this will do will provide financial support for the system to build recycling infrastructure. So it is solely focused around creating a circular economy and also creating kind of universal coordination for recycling programs, which is also needed. It's also very supply central, and it's really pushing the expansion of collection programs across the states. So if you flip to the next, EPR is coming. You see a lot of red there. They're really trying to figure out the way to make the language in these EPR bills beneficial for everyone. It's very important to have EPR be a part of an audited system. It's, if you can imagine that is a really detailed thing to track. So like everything, you have passed on the West Coast, but we are starting to see this is definitely going to move to green in a lot of those states over the next year or two. If we move on here, the last one that we'll talk about today as far as state legislation is these advanced recycling regulations that you may have seen pop up in the news. So they are working right now state by state to regulate advanced recycling facilities, chemical recycling facilities, as a manufacturing operation versus solid waste. So as a manufacturing operation, it's really important for these facilities to be considered that, we're not building these facilities just to burn plastic and create energy. These facilities are going material to material. So there's a lot of economic advantages for this. You know, with these facilities being built, you're going to eliminate a ton of plastics from landfill just because you're opening up that recycling capacity. We have seen some pushback, mostly from a consumer level, as well as, you know, the EPA. We've met with the EPA a few times actually over the past couple of weeks, us and our members, to talk and kind of teach them about advanced recycling. There's a lot of concern about pollution, groundwater contamination, air pollution, those kind of things. And then there's also a lot of skepticism around kind of the scalability of these facilities. So like anything, you know, we deal with a lot of trying to educate the myth versus the fact. We go back with showing greenhouse gas emissions, showing LCAs for these different materials, and really proving that, you know, these technologies are material to material. They're not just a material to energy facility. So very important one there. If you flip to the next, you'll see the overall map and what we're looking at right now. So all the green, there's a lot of green here, but these states, you know, there's probably maybe about 8 of those states on there that do have these facilities built and being built. So this is a very rapid expansion for these technologies. Our closest one to us here in Virginia is probably Tennessee, and that's with Eastman Chemical there. So you're going to start seeing a lot more about these in the news. These are advanced recycling is a necessary complement to mechanical recycling. We cannot solve the overall recycling challenge with one solution. So both these technologies work together. They're going to be great, and it's going to increase our capacity overall in the next couple of years. So if we move to the next. A lot happening also on the federal side of things. Congress enacted the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. There's a lot of anti-plastic hearings that, you know, our group, our government team takes part on. Mentioned the EPA there. They just released their national strategy to prevent plastic pollution this year. If you're engaged in the plastics industry, hopefully you sent in comments on that. And then the FTC Green Guides were also released this year, or an edit period for them, which I think should come out a finalized version at the beginning of next year. The Green Guides are essentially a set of guides to talk about how to market recyclable materials. So there's a lot in play there with advanced recycling and how to market those materials, how to be transparent, all important information. But if you're ever involved in the plastic supply chain, it's very good to kind of be aware of what these things are and what's being enacted on the federal side. So more than happy to talk more about that as well. So let's move on onto our third bucket for what's driving overall demand, which is our industry pledges. We like to call these the 30 by 30s. So this is like an example. I'll walk through a couple examples here in a minute. But so one of the big facts here, 49 out of 50 of the largest consumer brands have plastic-related sustainability goals. So you may see that in the form of recycled content. You also may see that in the form of making all their materials recyclable. But we'll walk through a few. And if you go to the next slide, and you can go ahead and click again real quick. I forget how I set this up. All right, you can stop there. So I've got a couple brands on here. They range from kind of consumer brands over to industrial brands as well. I've got a couple, you know, automotive and energy. But we'll just walk through and I'll show you what all of their sustainability goals kind of look like. So Coca-Cola, very similar to Pepsi with a sustainability goals here, but they want to collect and recycle 1 bottle for every bottle sold by 2030. Make all packaging recyclable by 2025, and then use about 50% recycled content in all of their bottles by 2030. You can go to the next one. Procter & Gamble, ensure that 100% of its packaging is recyclable or reusable in the next couple of years, and then they want to use 50% less virgin material by 2030. And this is a direct substitution for recycled content, right? Using recycled materials versus using virgin. So go to the next. Nestle, ensure all packaging, once again, is recyclable or reusable, and then use 50% of recycled PET in their bottles by 2025. Next. GE, a little more on the energy side of things, but reach carbon neutrality by 2030. And then they aim to increase chemical recycling from about 10% to 95% overall. Then I think there's one more. The last one is Ford. Ford, automotive focuses a little more on the greenhouse gas emissions, the overall pollution in the air. So they're looking to achieve carbon neutrality in the next 30 years, eliminate single-use plastics in all their manufacturing operations. So this would be, for example, if you send a bag of bolts to Ford to put on a truck, they're going to take that bag away and replace it with something else. And then they aspire to only use recycled and renewable plastics in vehicles globally. Kind of a unique one with these, there's a big separation between a Coca-Cola and a Ford, just because that single-use product is way different than what you're dealing with on a car, right? A bottle is going to be recycled and thrown away a lot quicker than you throwing away a vehicle. So there's an interesting dynamic there where that side of industry is not necessarily under attack as much as the single use section is, but I guarantee over the next 5, 10, 15 years, these automotive manufacturers are going to require that most of their plastic components are made from recycled content. And all of this, you can click next, is obviously focused around circular economy here. You can hit it maybe twice more. There you go. Okay, and then our last bucket here, which is consumer awareness. Very important. Consumer mindset has changed a lot over the last years. Got a few pictures on here, just kind of to show what is pushing our consumers to have this negativity around plastic materials. See a lot of plastics in the ocean, pictures of, animals, turtles, birds with, can rings and plastic bags and straws. And this is all being, just really ramped up with social media and news outlets. One quick little fact, I think that 95% of plastic in the ocean is actually from fishing equipment. It's not from single-use plastics, which is really kind of a staggering fact. But for some reason, we focus a lot on these single-use materials making their way to the environment because at the end of the day, all of it's bad. But so if you go to the next one here, consumers are being very, becoming very aware just with social media news outlets. Like I said, there's a lot of anti-plastics campaigns. There's a lot of skepticism around recycling in general. We get asked a lot, is recycling actually happening? We refute that a lot. People always say, one thing I always get is that people will say that, the same truck comes by and takes my trash and recycling. And that is just a huge myth. It is maybe the same truck, but they're going to 2 different locations. Most landfills that operate have a material recovery facility on site where they take recyclable materials to recycle. So they probably are using the same truck, which is actually saving them money on the equipment end. So a lot of skepticism around recycling, and this is really kind of pushing the consumers and affecting purchasing power, right? So as a consumer, you may go into a store now and buy products that say that you only buy products that have recycled content percentages on them. That may change your thought process all around if a material's plastic or if a material's cardboard. So this consumer awareness is kind of shifting the industry as a whole. And it's really starting to push this overall need for more recycled content. One thing that actually just came out today, and I'll throw a link in the chat here in a little bit, from our side of things is we have just developed a campaign called Recycling is Real. This spawned from, I think our CEO saw a billboard that said recycling is a myth, if anyone's seen those in their cities before. So we launched this campaign called Recycling is Real, and we're kind of going around to our members and talking about recycling processes in their facilities, making videos, talking about the people behind those recycling facilities as well. And it's a really neat campaign. We're going to be releasing a bunch of different videos. So I'll put a link in that here shortly. If you go to the next one. So this is some data that we produced and gathered, I think, from about 1,200 survey consumers a few months ago, and kind of asked them, what is your greatest environmental concern about plastics? And the number one is plastics in the ocean, which is kind of crazy because, like that stat earlier, about 5 or 4% of that is coming from single use. If you go to the next slide here, we also gathered a lot of data on that single use materials and plastic materials are extremely important. So we have this big gap of what's being posted online, what's being written about in the news, of plastics being such a terrible material, when really the average consumer, 62% of them believe that they're extremely important for their quality of life currently. So if we flip over to my last slide here, this is a chance for our industry to kind of come together, to be a voice for overall sustainability. Every company has a role if you touch plastics in any way. Definitely talk through a recycling program for those materials. Be an advocate for legislation and policy. This is extremely important. This is something a little out of my range, but we have a whole government affairs team at Plastics that works very closely on everything federal and state. So be that advocate for your company, for the industry, and then be a thought leader for new initiatives. If there's materials that you have recycling, that you're having trouble recycling in manufacturing, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to walk you through and kind of give you some leads on recyclers to use and everything like that, even if they're difficult materials. So with that, I think we will kick it over for any questions.
Thank you, Andy. I have a question. Obviously,
Sure.
EPR down in Illinois was heavily discussed. Actually, we have a lobbyist here for GLGA, and we addressed that not only with GLGA, but also with the Illinois Media Association, which used to be the Newspaper Association. I'm just curious if you could walk through a little bit about where that legislation stands. My understanding is it stalled in committee and really did not get back to the state legislature.
Yeah, you're correct. You're correct for that one. A big thing with EPR right now, and I think something that's going to kind of shift the enactment of EPR bills, is what happened in Colorado recently with them picking that PRO, which is their, producer responsibility organization. I think that's what the acronym is. But that's essentially a group that's kind of been halting, I think, a lot of the EPR bills across the country, that you need this PRO to kind of manage and facilitate EPR in general. So with that selection of that group, they were kind of the first ones to be like, we're going in, we're picking this PRO, they're reputable, and we're going to use them. So I think now that they have that in place, we're going to start to see a lot of these bills pass a little quicker.
Well, one of the things that worried us was the idea of creating an enforcement agency. So it actually would have been a separate enforcement agency within the state of Illinois, a cabinet level position, instead of coming under Illinois EPA. What they knocked it down to, my understanding was, a submission once a year, basically a 2-page form that says, here's what we do to make sure that our responsibility to the environment is being upheld with the materials that we're utilizing. But my understanding is this is moving pretty quickly through a lot of states.
Correct.
All right. Is there any other questions? Well, I appreciate this. Thank you so much. No questions. They're a quiet crowd today.
All quiet. Everybody knows everything about plastics. Nobody needs help with film. We can talk film if you want.
Anyone? All right.
All right.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Andy. It was extremely useful.
Absolutely.
Great information, and we might have a follow-up conversation with you sometime in the future. Maybe you'd like to do another one, webinar for
Yeah.
us, because I think the information and the topics are extremely useful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Appreciate the invite. Let me know if any members have issues with film recycling or they want to talk about it. More than happy to discuss that with them.
Excellent. Well, with that, thank you everyone for participating, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.
Have a good one.